Hi everybody, and welcome. I'm Barbara. I'm with Indivisible Kensington. For those of you who don't know about Indivisible, just a little brief background. It actually started back in 2017 with the first election of Trump, and by two people who had been young congressional staffers, and they were so freaked and they just didn't know what to do, and put an online guide up about how people can work with their representatives and pressure them to do the things that they think are important to do, and that the power that they really had doing that. It very quickly grew so that there were indivisible chapters in every congressional district in the country, which is pretty amazing. Indivisible Kensington was started by Robin there in the back with me back in 2017. And the Indivisibles then were quite instrumental really in helping to save the Affordable Care Act, and also very active in the 2018 congressional elections, which we saw a great big turnaround for. But it's really with the election of Trump in 2024 that just caused this giant explosion. And now Indivisible is really one of the leading progressive organizations. They've been part of the leadership of these mass mobilizations we've seen, doing all these raucous town halls, particularly in red districts, often when the representative refuses to show up. And supporting a lot of local actions and strategizing and doing training and having resources. We in Kensington have been trying to figure out, what are our local priorities, and really this event tonight grew out of an all-member meeting we had back in April, when already we were getting lots of signs that there were threats to our freedom of speech, our freedom of expression, the freedom of the press. I mean, probably the most scary thing that we all saw happen was Renisa Ozturk being picked up on the street by masked, armed men for an editorial that she had co-authored. And of course, it's only escalated since then, with this week being quite a culmination. We probably couldn't have planned it better if we'd had a line to Trump about what was going to be coming down. One thing I want everybody to be aware of, that I actually think one of our speakers, Catherine, will speak to, is UC Berkeley having disclosed 160 names of faculty and students to the Office of Civil Rights in the U.S. Department of Education for alleged acts of anti-Semitism, completely trumped up charges, baseless. But then we've also seen the firing of Jimmy Kimmel in the aftermath of this shooting of the right-wing Charlie Kirk. It's been quite a week. And I know our speakers will be addressing some of these issues. So what we're hoping to achieve out of this tonight, really you're going to hear from what I consider three outstanding speakers who really their work speaks to the importance of fighting for our civil rights, our freedom of speech, our First Amendment rights, and to tell our history as our history really is. Hear about what the experience has been like in this past 6 months, 8 months, 9 months, and hopefully really generate some ideas about what we can do on the local level to resist. And with that, I think I will hand it over to my colleague Lori, who's going to be moderating this, and she'll introduce the speakers.
Can you hear me? Yeah. I'm just going to introduce our speakers, all of whom are really remarkable, and we really appreciate you taking time to kind of talk to folks. So Catherine Lhamon at the far end is the inaugural executive director of the UC Berkeley Edley Center on Law and Democracy. Until this past January 20th, she was the Assistant Secretary for Civil Rights at the U.S. Department of Education. Previously, she managed President Biden's equity policy portfolio and chaired the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights. She also served in Governor Gavin Newsom's cabinet as Legal Affairs Secretary. In addition to all that amazing government service, she litigated civil rights cases at the ACLU, the National Center for Youth Law, and the Public Counsel Law Center. David Snyder is a lawyer and former journalist. He became the executive director of the First Amendment Coalition in 2017. Before leading the First Amendment Coalition, he represented journalists and news companies, served a 2-year term as the voluntary attorney member of the San Francisco Sunshine Ordinance Task Force, which hears citizens' complaints about violations of that city's open government law. He began his journalism career when he was still in high school at his hometown newspaper, the Albuquerque Tribune, and went on to work at the Dallas Morning News and the Washington Post, where he was a staff writer on the Metro desk. Sounds, David, like at a very young age you wanted to be a journalist. Dorothy Lazard, in the middle, grew up in San Francisco and Oakland, and after receiving her Master's of Library and Information Studies from UC Berkeley, began her career as a librarian in 1983. She joined the Oakland Public Library in 2000, where she was responsible for a number of collections, including history, biography, genealogy, etc. From 2009 until her retirement in 2021, congratulations, Dorothy, she was the head librarian of Oakland Public Library's Oakland History Center, where she hosted and delivered history lectures, mounted exhibits, and wrote articles about Oakland history. She's encouraged people of all ages, cultures, and educational levels to explore local history. Her new memoir, What You Don't Know Will Make a Whole New World, was shortlisted for the 2024 Northern California Book Award for Creative Nonfiction. And with that, we're going to ask each speaker to speak for about 10 minutes, 10 to 15 minutes. And we'll start with David and move on to Catherine, and then Dorothy. And then I'll do a few moderated questions, and then we'll open it up for questions that you all have. So hold those questions in your minds. I believe there's some cards at the front desk if you want to do it that way, or we can just go around with the microphone. Okay, David.
Thank you so much, and thanks for coming out tonight, for inviting us to speak here. I'm going to talk just a little bit about my organization and the work that we do, and then I'll talk a little bit about how that work applies, and some general thoughts that I will try to leave you with in these crazy times that we're living in. So my organization, First Amendment Coalition, FAC, our mission is to protect and promote free speech, free press, and access to government information. We carry that mission out through a variety of programs. We have a strategic litigation program. We file lawsuits in state and federal court. We have a free legal hotline that anybody and everybody can use, although the majority of people that use it are journalists. We have an education program, live education, and a library of published materials on our website about the First Amendment, about open records and open meetings laws. We are nonpartisan, and we are funded by individual contributions and support from foundations like the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation. We are focused on California. The organization's name used to be the California First Amendment Coalition. That changed a few years back, but we retain our California focus. Since we don't have a Washington, D.C. presence, we often rely on, and when we can, support larger, better funded national organizations that are suing the Trump administration a lot these days. But our work is proudly local, and I'll talk about that in a moment. And I think that actually is all the more important now, a focus on local and state level issues, given that, or even though we're seeing this tremendous assault on individual liberties and rule of law coming from Washington, D.C. This may seem a little counterintuitive, but I think all activism and all advocacy is ultimately local, even if the focus is on things happening on the other coast. FAC, we are not an activist group, but we support activism, and we do so in a nonpartisan fashion, because activism relies on the rights that FAC fights for. The rights that we fight for, I like to think of the oxygen of all of our other rights. Without the right to protest, without the right to petition government, without the right to speak out, all of our other civil liberties don't mean all that much. So I believe really at the foundation, sort of the foundational rights. So we are not partisan in our advocacy, and I just want to give a couple of examples of that. So we sued about a year ago Huntington Beach for what in essence amounted to a book ban in Huntington Beach. This was a sort of MAGA-generated thing. People under the age of 18 were not allowed to view or check out books with sexual content, not defined in the rule, and that could therefore be applied to the Bible, to Shakespeare. I mean, sexual content could mean anything, but let's just not cut to the chase. What it really meant was LGBTQ issues. So we sued, along with the ACLU of Southern California. I'm happy to report that we prevailed in that lawsuit just last week. The judge said that Huntington Beach cannot continue to violate, it's actually a state law that we sued under, the California Freedom to Read Act. Important First Amendment right, by the way, is the right to receive information without government interference. So there is a First Amendment issue often when book bans come about. Another example, on the opposite end of the political spectrum, we took the former Alameda County DA, very progressive Pamela Price, to task for excluding a journalist from a public, otherwise public press briefing because she didn't like the way this journalist had covered her office. So we took her to task for that, and she reversed her decision, let that journalist back in. So we work on, I think it's just fundamentally important for our work, and this isn't true for everybody, but it should be nonpartisan. The First Amendment is nonpartisan. A few other things that we've worked on recently, we have a lawsuit pending, which we can get a lot of applause tonight, maybe. Last week again, we got a preliminary injunction issued against LAPD for attacking journalists who were covering the protests and demonstrations that arose out of ICE raids in downtown Los Angeles. So that, again, we were joined by several really excellent lawyers, several of whom used to work for the ACLU but are now in private practice. So we have that pending. We have a pending lawsuit against Doge for failure to produce records under the Federal Freedom of Information Act. And we have, it's not a lawsuit yet, but we are advocating strongly against the Modesto city ordinance that bans the use of private protective equipment by journalists and others, but it's really targeted at journalists who are covering demonstrations and protests. And again, to sort of cut to the chase and talk about what this ordinance is really about, it's about not wanting journalists to cover ICE protests of ICE activities. So I'm optimistic, actually, that we're going to get them to rescind this ordinance. And last week, 2 weeks ago, we produced two really well done, I didn't do them so I can say that, reporters' guides, field guides we're calling them. So for journalists who are covering immigration enforcement, was the first field guide. We published that in Spanish and in English. Second field guide that came out last week is for journalists covering police shootings. So one of the most important things we do is to support journalism in doing its work, journalists in doing their work, because they are the kind of often the megaphones for the general population. So I'm going to talk sort of broadly now. Everybody is focused on Donald Trump these days, sometimes to the exclusion of everything else, and that's totally appropriate. He has really taken a wrecking ball to democratic norms, to institutions at a pace that is really hard to follow. When a man swears on the morning of January 20th to defend and uphold the Constitution, and then by that afternoon has issued an executive order that explicitly violates the Constitution. This is the birthright citizenship order. The Constitution's plain text is clear, the Supreme Court has interpreted it, and he says, I'm not going to do that. So you're in a different world when that happens. This was on January 20th. And we really are. This is new territory for us in the United States. And we shouldn't look away. I have to force myself to keep looking at it. But tonight, I want to briefly make the case that this Trump obsession that so many of us have is distracting us from things that maybe are more important, or at least that we can have more, that we have more agency in, things that we can actually do something about. Because Trump is having an effect far, far down ballot, if you will. His hostility to democratic norms is affecting institutions as small as the Modesto City Council or the San Joaquin County Sheriff's Office, and I'll talk about that in a second, and quite a bit larger, the LA Police Department. The difference, for better and for worse, although tonight I'd like to argue that it's for the better, is that we can often directly do something about what's happening at the local level. And if we can't do something, we can at least pay attention. And I think that is so crucial to pay attention. I'm not saying don't pay attention to Trump. I'm not saying there's nothing that you can do about this person in Washington, D.C. I'm saying do those things, but don't forget about the local. Don't forget about what's happening right in your own communities. I would say support the unfortunately small number, and this number is dwindling every day, of local news outlets that cover local news, Berkeley side, Oakland side, KQED, Cal Matters. All of these places are doing absolutely essential work for our democracy, and they're imperiled, as news organizations generally are. But aside from next year's midterms, or from offering support to large national organizations that can fight Trump right where he is, and those are really important things, there's not necessarily all that much that an individual can do. There's plenty that you should do, and we can talk about what you can, but you can have an effect locally, and that effect locally may have national implications ultimately. So I'd like to make the case, and I'm not sure everyone will agree with it, my wife doesn't, that while we're focusing on Trump, whose actions we don't necessarily have that much power over, we're letting maybe the most important institutions that we can affect sort of die on the vine. I'd like to make the case that for supporting and reading or listening to local press, supporting local rights organizations, regional rights organizations, because this is part of the authoritarian playbook. Make people feel powerless and lost and alone. Well, by acting at the local level, while also keeping your eye on the ball in Washington, you're none of those things. You can be empowered and you can actually make a difference, and that's so important, at least for my own mental stability, is to realize that I'm privileged to be in the job that I have, and I always try to make the most of that privilege, but there's only so much that I and my organization can do. And a lot of what we're doing is locally focused, not focused on Washington. And I guess I'd remind folks that movements that end up making national and international history all ultimately begin with the local. They begin at the local level. And none of this is to detract from the really historical and alarming scope of Trump's actions, or to criticize anybody who can follow it and is doing something directly about Trump. If you can do those things, absolutely kudos to you, but I would say there's a parallel path. You can do that and chew gum at the same time. And following the local and not losing track of it, by local I mean statewide, is maybe just as important to defending democracy as speaking out against Trump. Patrick Moynihan, everybody knows, he said all politics is local. I would expand that a little bit. I'd say all activism is local, and I would say all news is local. What do I mean by that? Well, I'm going to give you a few examples, a couple of which I've already mentioned, things that where local leaders have really gone off the rails, and that my organization has touched on. And I want to ask for a show of hands. This is not to shame anybody for not knowing or having heard of these things, I promise, because I swear a lot of members of the board of my own organization probably haven't heard of these things. But let me list these things and ask, show of hands, if you just heard about it other than me mentioning it tonight. So Christina Corpus, the San Mateo County Sheriff, she just had a hearing, a really extraordinary hearing, to remove her from office. And she wanted that hearing to be secret, not in public. Who's heard about Christina Corpus? All right, we've got some news watchers here, I like it. We were involved in that. We actually, I credit my legal director with getting that hearing maintained open. So the public was able to go, the press was able to cover it. Really important sort of state constitutional issue. Second, Modesto City Council, I mentioned this earlier, their ban on personal protective equipment at demonstrations. Anybody heard of that one? That's not really local. Modesto's a little far away. 0 on that. Third, the Huntington Beach book ban that I mentioned earlier. Okay, a lot of people have heard. All right, fair number. Again, like a really fundamental right sort of issue that not necessarily everybody's. Fourth, and I'm very confident, fairly, that no one will refer to this one, but the San Joaquin County Sheriff sent deputies to a couple of journalists' homes and said, hey, where'd you get those records that were unlawfully removed from the county clerk's office? And they said, truthfully, I went to the counter and asked for them. Like, that is journalism. Like, that is First Amendment protected activity. And he's sending deputies to reporters' houses? Like, what? Anybody heard of that one? Probably not. That's San Joaquin County. I mean, again, that's pretty far away. So, as I said, like, it's not surprising that people haven't heard of this, and I'm not shaming anybody that you haven't heard of it, but these things are really important violations. They're really important to our democracy, and I think if everybody's focused on Washington, D.C., this kind of stuff happens and it metastasizes and becomes a problem. All these things matter. You know, Corpus wanted to close off public access, First Amendment right to attend these kinds of hearings, and we got in there and forced her to make it to maintain them as public. But all of these things are happening in a context in which the highest elected office in the land is just taking a wrecking ball to government institutions, to government transparency, to the idea of an independent media, the idea of an independent judiciary, the idea of an independent civil society. Would these local examples have happened if Trump were not in office? That's impossible to say. But what I believe we can say is that he's certainly not making it harder for local governments and state governments to be more secretive or more overbearing or more violative of individual rights. So just to be clear, I'm not saying that you or anyone else should stop paying attention to what's happening in Washington. What I'm saying is, one, keep doing that, but two, don't do it to the exclusion of the local. These are areas where people really can make a difference. And for years now, nobody's really been minding the store in a lot of these local governments. Local media outlets are dying off in what some have called an extinction level event. 3,300 newspapers have gone out of business in the last 20 years. 3,300 newspapers that once existed no longer do. That's, to me, astounding. And I think it's been really damaging to the ability of the local press and therefore the public to mind their local institutions and make sure that they're healthy to perform that essential watchdog function. So in some places, it's not really even possible to follow local news anymore unless you yourself go to City Hall or the school board meeting, and I've done a lot of those as a reporter, and believe me, it's not fun, and you want somebody there summarizing it for you, but you can't get local news in a lot of places. And even in places where local coverage survives, Trump's ascent, I think, has completely eclipsed that coverage. So you have a lot of people living in local communities who are only watching MSNBC or Fox News or CNN. And it creates this bizarre kind of nationalization of local issues. So you get people on school boards who are concerned about whether their kids are reading LGBTQ books. Not what are the teachers getting paid enough? Do we have enough books? They're worried about these issues that don't really have any bearing on local politics. I'm going to shut up soon, I promise. But I will say, if you take anything away from my babbling tonight, I would say 4 things. 1, embrace and promote the principles of democratic rule, small d, especially in places where you can have a clear and strong voice. 2, follow the local. Believe me, there's plenty to get outraged about at the local level. Even if you're a dyed-in-the-wool progressive, there's crazy stuff going on in Sacramento. First Amendment violations all the time in these bills. And we get in there to try to stop it. 3, stand up for facts, stand up against misinformation and disinformation. And 4, and this is like a mantra I have to tell myself, like every day or at least every week, do not lose hope and do not stop paying attention. And I think if we can all do that, we might make it through the next 3.5 years, maybe. Thank you. I'd be remiss if I didn't say on behalf of my organization that we're supported from contributions. If you're a believer in free expression, free press, open government, please consider supporting our cause at FAC. And now I will stop.
So I'll jump in and start with my thanks to all of you for coming out tonight, and thanks to Indivisible Kensington for putting this on, and to my terrific colleagues. I really enjoyed, David, just hearing from you, and I'm so hearing from the librarian and the books. So just to start also with day 1 of the Trump administration, it is at this point, the height of irony that on day one, President Trump issued an executive order claiming to restore free speech and end federal censorship. That executive order, just to ground us in what the president promised, terms the First Amendment essential to the success of our republic, and it states the policy of the United States to secure the right of the American people to engage in constitutionally protected speech and to ensure that no taxpayer, can you not hear me? That's okay. Can you hear me now? Okay. Is this better?
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, sorry. Usually I'm too loud. So but to ensure that no taxpayer resources are used to facilitate any conduct that would abridge free speech. That's the promise on the first day of this presidency. But instead of leading those principles in practice, this administration is shockingly regressive with respect to speech, repeatedly indicating that speech with which it agrees is the only acceptable speech. The Trump administration actively works to direct what can be taught, what can be thought, and what can be learned in schools, and it places itself in a position to direct university departmental leadership and ideological composition in universities. The Secretary of Education at the United States Department of Education went on national TV to say that universities should be able to keep their federal grant funds so long as they are in sync with the president's policies. Those are her words. And the Trump administration has secured and sought agreements with schools allowing the presidency to direct departmental leadership and faculty ideological composition in universities. So far, congressional efforts to curb these excesses have not succeeded. Just to give one example, in July, Senator Chris Murphy offered an amendment in an appropriations committee that would have said that no president can withhold funds from a college to try to control their speech. That simply. That amendment failed on party lines, with every Republican voting against it. And so, the speech repression continues. Many of us have likely heard the news that Jimmy Kimmel's show has been suspended in response to things he said on the show and associated political pressure from the White House. And just to be clear about that pressure, a political appointee said on a podcast, quote, "We can do this the easy way or the hard way." And he noted that broadcast companies have a license granted by us at the FCC. So it's not subtle, the pressure. President Trump himself has sued 2 major mainstream news outlets for politicized claims of defamation about his distaste for their negative reporting about him. And his counsel in the latest suit said, this is a quote, the New York Times, is a full-throated mouthpiece of the Democratic Party, with which many in the Democratic Party would be quick to differ about the New York Times. The State Department has announced that it is investigating foreign nationals who celebrate Charlie Kirk's death on social media, and Secretary of State Marco Rubio has posted on social media that visa revocations are underway. So without parsing the First Amendment rights of non-citizens, these actions necessarily chill and are designed to chill speech broadly, including among citizens. And just to pick up on that, we should be looking at local in addition to national pressure. These state speech control efforts do exist at the state level as well. I'm just going to give one example, and this is repeat recidivist Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton sent a school district recently, last month, a letter requesting information related to, quote, anti-Israel rhetoric used by teachers or staff. So this is a deeply dangerous and repressive time, and I deeply appreciate that all of you have come together for a conversation about freedom of speech and what we can do to protect our core democracy rights. In this time of repeated political violence and dangerous repression of speech and deep polarization and division, it's important, as it always is, to ground ourselves in our nation's aspirations and what we can do to live them. A first core principle is that people have a right to express differing views. Full stop. Second, dissent is patriotic. We should not forget that. And we also do well to remember that notwithstanding our ideals, our actual history in this country is that we have many, many times tended toward repressing speech and dissent. So we need now and always to work to restrain those impulses time and again. I'm going to give a very short history, but it's not going to feel short when I start because I'm going back to the Sedition Act of 1798. But I'm going to fast forward after that. But that Sedition Act was enacted not long after we added the First Amendment to the Constitution. And the act made it a crime to print, utter, or publish any false, scandalous, and malicious writing about the government. So that was an early test of our free speech protection. And it was wildly unpopular, just to say. And the next president let that act expire and pardoned the people who had been convicted under it, but it is, an example of how long we've been struggling with our aspirations and our reality. Fast forwarding a lot to the McCarthy era, we lived through years of congressional hearings by the House Un-American Activities Committee challenging people based on their protected First Amendment activities. There was the things that they said and published, and also the people that they associated with. And more recently, in the months following September 11th terrorist activity, the United States Department of Justice sought information from 220 colleges and universities about confidential information about students from the Middle East or with Arab surnames. I don't think that's so widely known that that happened in this country. And I think it feels likely locally familiar today, following news reports that the University of California, Berkeley shared with the Trump administration names of 160 people involved in alleged anti-Semitic incidents about which the university had received notice. So we know from our history that ratting out our neighbors and glibly watching while people identified by national origin and or attributed viewpoint suffer unequal and poor treatment from their government itself. This is not news. That has, in our history, every time divided our country, separated us from our ideals, and harmed our international standing. So, let's not do it. We know it doesn't work. And we know, and we have concrete examples throughout history of the value of standing for justice and speaking up for our neighbors and for ourselves. I'm going to offer one reminder here, and that is that Senator McCarthy held hearings for years in his campaign against speech and association related to suspected communism. 4 years in, when he'd been doing this for all of that time, finally at a hearing, lawyer Joseph Welch responded to what he thought was especially odious questioning, and he famously said, "You have done enough. Have you no sense of decency?" That question, those words, were what stopped the McCarthy era. That was one man's willingness to stand up against the speech repressive bullying that ended it for the country. In my life, leading a law and democracy center for 3 months, but it's been a long 3 months. And so in my life doing this work, I often hear people asking why some institution is not standing up or why someone else is not acting. And I do find that inaction distressing. But the antidote to it is to ask ourselves, what are we doing? Our democracy is, and always has been, fragile. And our guardrails for democracy are only as effective as they are used. So when Congress, or courts, or law firms, or universities, to name some readily available examples, don't stand up for principle, autocratic impulses persist and succeed. But courage is contagious. And if we stand up in school board meetings, in city council meetings, in faculty associations, in our use of corporations, to express ourselves and to share our expectations of others, we are democracy defenders. We are using our power to shore up the guardrails on which democracy depends. You are doing that important work by coming today, so I know you are ready, and I thank you. And I hope each of us remembers that these are not small or inconsequential acts. Our dissent, our insistence on lawful action, our insistence on equal and fair treatment at the hands of our government, our insistence that our government works for us, are what make democracy work. And when we don't do it, our democracy doesn't either. So we can ask and we can insist that the institutions we are part of are responsive to us and satisfy their legal obligations to us. So when we learn that a university gives names of our colleagues to a government that is demonstrably hostile to them, for example, we can object. And we can make clear our expectation that no other institution behaves similarly. And for those of us who insist on following political winds, we want them to know the power of us changing those winds. So I am an everything, everywhere, all at once person, which means don't sit out your power or your opportunity. And don't feel like your voice is too small or that too many things are happening to make response worth it. The story of our democracy is that we fight for it. I'm going to leave you with one quote from Lyndon Johnson when he was signing the 1964 Civil Rights Act. He said, "Those who founded our country knew that freedom would be secure only if each generation fought to renew and enlarge its meaning." So keep up your fight, and I look forward to doing it with you.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Fantastic. Wow. I feel like, going out in the street right now. Very much. I'm glad that you all could come out. I am going to speak to you about my area of expertise, and that is the public libraries. I know a lot of us have heard about book bans in the public library and protests at city council meetings regarding public libraries. How many people has anybody here not heard about recent book bans? No, right? So I want to clarify some things for you tonight, but I also want to inspire you to really get, as my fellow speakers have said, really get involved on a local level. This is very much a local issue, our public libraries. Our public libraries represent our individual communities. Catherine told me that her public library is a Golden Gate branch of Oakland's library system. Mine is a Diamond branch. And those different branches represent those different communities. And so it is a very local level. So I want to talk to you tonight about, I want to share some statistics with you that I hope will invigorate you to do some things, activate some things. But I want to begin more generally and talk about our social infrastructure. The public library, like this community room, like our schools, like our parks, are part of a social infrastructure that we all pay for with our tax dollars, that we all have come through as children, as young adults, as parents, that we've come through. And so the library is really important to all of us because what does it do? It promotes literacy. For many of us, it was the first civic organization that we were members of. Wouldn't you say that? Yeah. When did you get your library card? I got mine when I was 10, my first library card, but I was going to libraries all along. But it's the first time that we get to practice citizenship, that little library card. I remember mine, my first one was typed out on a little piece of paper. But these cards introduce our children to the process of becoming a part of their society. You belong in this community. Here's your card to prove it. And here's a place where you can learn more about that community. And so it's a really important piece of paper, or plastic as it is today. So I just wanted to stress that there's been an attack on our social infrastructure, not just during this current presidential administration, but throughout time there have been attacks on the public library. So for me, I don't see it as something new. I see what's going on right now as particularly egregious. And I just want to share with you some things. First, I want to define something. I know book banning has been much in the news for some years now, particularly after COVID, during the COVID era and these years later. But we've seen a remarkable amount of book challenges and book bans happening since COVID. And maybe it's because parents were at home with their kids more, seeing what the kids were reading, seeing what they were bringing home, seeing what their textbooks were. I don't really know, but it's a sharp spike. I'll share with you some statistics. In 2000, 378 separate titles were challenged in American public libraries. Keep that in your head, 378. In 2023, 3 years later, 2000, and then 23 years later, 4,240 titles were challenged. That's an incredible leap in 23 years, an incredible leap of almost, 4,000 books. It's crazy. The number of titles that were targeted for censorship at public libraries increased by 92% during 2023 and during 2022. School libraries saw 11%, but at 92% for public libraries, there were censorship challenges. 17 American states have banned over 100 books. 17 of them. And that, we only have 50 states. This is incredible. And the majority of these book bans and these book challenges are books dealing with people of color, immigrants, and LGBTQ community. And so what we're finding is not only the book bans and challenges, but we're also now, it's ratcheted up to a real demonization of the librarians and library workers who put these contested books into the hands of the public. The majority of these book challenges have to do with books directed at children. Children's lit, YA lit especially, has been challenged. And what people are finding, and I'm getting these statistics, by the way, from the American Library Association's Office for Intellectual Freedom. And they're the ones who track these statistics and track these book challenges. And I'll talk to you also about some organizations that we all should keep in touch with to find out more about these bans. And so I want to also say, when you hear the word book banned, it doesn't mean necessarily that a book has been chucked out the window or put in a recycling bin. It could simply mean that the book has been removed from that section where the contested book lived to another section of the library. It could be behind the librarian's the reference desk, and so you have to ask for the book. And this is a form of, I consider this a form of outing for a lot of people who might want to, for example, they might be in the closet and they are wanting to investigate, well, why am I feeling this way? Their gender identity, or their gender identity may be something that they haven't shared with their community or their parents. And maybe they want to read about it or read a book about somebody like them. But then having to go and ask someone for that book in a public space like a reference desk, can be very intimidating. So a lot of these challenges have really frightening measures going on in our community, in communities around the country. And then some more statistics. I just want to share with you some of these statistics that I found. In March, Trump signed an executive order cutting funding for the Institute for Museum and Library Services. Now that's an organization that provides funding for library services, museum services that are providing help for disability services, that they may be disability services, and also rural libraries and so forth. So there is an enormous amount of work that they do to keep our libraries open, especially our small libraries and our rural libraries. But that funding is promised to be cut next year. The Institute for Museum and Library Services provided $266 million in grants to the museums and libraries in the country. So it's really kind of remarkable that that Trump has promised to cut out the Institute entirely next year. He cut $30 million between March and September of this year. The other thing I just feel like we really need to get invested in is getting people in touch with what's going on in our libraries on a local level. And as you were saying, we really do need to get kind of engaged in what's going on in our libraries, what services we provide, money that can go into different aspects of the services in our public libraries. So our libraries are promoting literacy. They're providing a place for people to practice citizenship. That's one of the main things about the public libraries that I really, really love. But with these book bans, what we're seeing right now is a reduction of literature, a lack of variety in literature that is available to our libraries. There have been real cuts in the types of books we have, and there's a lot of cultural erasure going on as a result of these cuts in the collective development budgets. And then book banning, I mentioned it earlier, but our book banning and book challenges are, the book challenges and book bans are two different things, and I just want to make sure that I define those terms. The book challenges are complaints about books and other materials that can lead to banning. And as I said before, the book bannings are removal of books or removal of the books from a particular section of the library. Something else I want to talk about. We are also kind of challenged to make sure that we are supporting our librarians and making sure that we are representing those places in our city government that support the library, whether it be through the schools or city council. We are trying to do that. So I thought about 10 ways that we can fight back against some of these challenges. Locally, we don't have a lot of challenges as far as book bans and book challenges here locally. But we do need to make sure that we're fighting for our public libraries, the strength of our public libraries, because they're, they're city agencies and they can get cut just like everything else. So 10 ways that I thought to fight back are: join your local school board or your library advisory commission, vote for library supporting bond measures when they appear on the ballot, become an active member of your local public library so you'll know what's going on. You can also check in regularly with your advocacy groups. I know at Oakland Public we have a library advocacy group, and each of our branches have a friends group that support our freedom to read. You can also speak up at city council meetings whenever complaints about the library arise. You can add a free little library to your community so you can share literature with your community members. You can also join the friends group of local library to support their programming, their books and material acquisition and outreach efforts. And also share books with kids to encourage their reading. Volunteer for a youth literacy or creative writing or writing tutoring project. And also to talk to children about what's at stake when a country loses its freedom to read. There are books of interest that you might be interested in seeing, or reading, I should say. Overdue, Reckoning with the Public Library by Amanda Oliver is a particularly useful one to find out what are the challenges that people are, just to get a better understanding of people who work in libraries, what they're going through. The public library has been very impacted by all of the social things that are going on in our community as far as poverty, homelessness, and so forth. So libraries are, I know we're talking about freedom to read, but the libraries are very much impacted by all the social ills that we face. So, something else I wanted to share. I've been working on a second book, and that book is about my 20 years at the Oakland Public Library. What I've been trying to capture in this book, I'm in the process of editing it. What I've tried to capture is how complicated working in libraries has become, because libraries have been so impacted by social media. It's been impacted by financial issues, and so it's really important for me and all of us, I think, to look at ways we can promote the library and our freedom to read that it promotes, and just trying to keep our libraries robust as they were when I came years ago. So sorry, I've been very stuttery tonight, but thank you for having me. Yeah.
Great talks. Thank you, everyone. You had really interesting perspectives. One thing I'll just add to Dorothy's list of 10 is Pegasus Books, at least, has a project where you can buy books that are banned in other places, and they will send them to schools and things. They also have a prisoners project where you can buy books for prisoners, but specifically to book banning, they put them out and buy them, and off they go. So I have a few questions, and just 3 actually, I think, and anyone can jump in and answer these. The first one is, to what extent do you think our First Amendment rights have been mortally injured? I mean, Catherine already talked about how many times we've seen this and we've come back, but this does feel a bit different maybe, although Joseph McCarthy, 4 years on, that's a really long time. And what forms of pushback by courts or others have been most effective? So David looks like he wants to jump right in.
Yeah. I mean, the law around the First Amendment hasn't changed, and I don't think it's going to change, but the law is one thing and practice is a wholly different thing. And one of the really damaging things the Trump administration is doing, which we're seeing right now with the Jimmy Kimmel thing, is create a chilling effect that causes people to self-censor. One of the most important results of the First Amendment, I guess is the way you could put it, is that people know they're free to speak, and so they do. But if they see out in the world that people expressing themselves freely leads to adverse consequences that are not addressed, they don't talk. I had a reporter today, I talked to a reporter in Southern California who was asking me questions about a local school board, it was a local school employee who was put on administrative leave for things that they'd said about Charlie Kirk. And so I was talking about the difference between school employees and if you're a member of the public and all that. And at the end of it, she said, this was a reporter. Said, so one of the lessons we might draw from this is be careful what you say. And I was like, God, I hope that's not the lesson we got from what I said. Because that's not the point. But that is the effect. So I think to wrap up, the law of the First Amendment, the rights as they exist in the books, it's possible that Trump's Supreme Court will roll back some of those rights, maybe, but I don't see those changing. It's the sort of real rights, the rights that people feel they have, that I'm worried about.
Anybody else want to talk about that?
I just want to jump in on whether we're cooked, whether it's over. It's never over. I mean, it can feel really bad, and sometimes I think it does feel really bad right now. And, obviously there have been lots of other times in history when it's felt really bad. But we can and we do come back. And it's only over if we let it be. If we're not a participant in insisting that, we are going to speak, we will be heard, and we will ask for our government to be responsive to what we say. I thought your point, Dorothy, about little free libraries and using the library is so important, right? I've just moved back to California from the DC area. And in my little community, where I was, which I'm very glad not to be in now, but where I was, there were little free libraries everywhere. And I'm surprised to come back to my neighborhood in Oakland, and I see them, but not often, and they often don't have a lot of books. And so, we should have more little free libraries, and we should be using our public spaces more. And the way to make sure that our ability to speak freely is not over is to speak. We can insist over and over that we will speak, we will use our voice, and we will not be silenced. And that's our right. It's our right every day.
I think it's very important for us to fight against erasure. That's how I'm feeling about this period of book bans and hostility toward librarians and hostility toward people who are fighting for our freedom to read and to have access to literature. What's concerning to me right now is not only the books that are made available in our public library, in our public spaces, and even in our little free libraries. The thing that really bothers me is having the people who are making materials available to our public. And I feel like that's why I'm having trouble speaking tonight. I'm so agitated by this. What I'm learning is that people have started to, the impulse to be very broad in our access, providing access to people. It's really has been challenged by fear-mongering and making people afraid of, if I make this material available to you, that's going to be a bad thing. You know, I'll give you an example. Librarians now, some of them, not all of them, of course, are concerned about, well, what if I do make this available? You know, what if I make this story available to your child, or a book that's contested available? What will happen to me? You know, what will happen to me? What will happen to my boss or my branch? So there are things that we have to protect no matter what, and it might be protecting a particular library. It may be protecting our right to choose whatever books that are available. What I'm trying to say is people are wanting free press, but they don't really know how to secure it in this climate. So that's all I'll say.
Thanks a lot. So courts, crowds, and courage have been described as the 3 C's of resisting threats to the rule of law, defending democracy, and protecting our Constitution. That was our AG at an Indivisible meeting. Quanta. He was at this Indivisible meeting, and he came up, I think he came up with these 3 C's, which I think is great. So the 3 C's, courts, crowds, and courage, which I think you've all mentioned, at least one of them. What do you think are the most effective actions we citizens can take to defend our First Amendment freedoms? I know we've been talking about it, but is there sort of that one thing you want to say? None of us are, well, 2 of you could be in the courts, but most of us aren't, so anybody want to jump in?
I really like Catherine's point about you have to sort of exercise the right. That's not the way you put it, but you have to speak. And Dorothy's point about erasure, I think that's a beautiful, it's the wrong word for it, but it's not beautiful, but it's a beautiful way to put it. I think one of the ways in which bad actors erase people is by scaring them into not talking, or scaring them into not checking out the book that they want to check out. Because that's exactly what the point of a lot of the bans is, the one in Huntington Beach that we did. It was to put the book somewhere that you had to go get permission to get it. You might as well just burn the book. I mean, so I guess I don't have any specifics. I wish I had like a, you should do A, B, C, D, and E, but don't let the fear mongers make you afraid, I guess is what I would say.
I can give you an example. You mentioned the Patriot Act. Right after I had just started at the Oakland Main Library, and after the Patriot Act was, put into place, we were told, the library staff was told that, we have to surrender, well, part of the Patriot Act was you have to surrender records of your library users if someone comes, and they don't have to have done anything. They don't have to have, I wish I had the wording here, because I just included it in my latest book. And what we decided to do in Oakland is to, instead of just blanketly giving out someone's records, maybe it's a kid who's doing a report on Nazism, or maybe it's a kid doing a report on prostitution or something else that may be deemed controversial. And we don't want to have to surrender, or if they're doing something on Muslim terrorism, we don't want to have to surrender their records at all. So we decided, or our administration decided at the library, just to expunge all the records. Every time you check out something, we just disappear the record. And that worked for us. I know there were cases in places like Michigan and other places in the Midwest who were surrendering records left and right because they didn't want to antagonize the feds. But it goes against our freedom to read, part of our freedom to read is a freedom to have access, to have a private relationship with the librarians. And so it was really important for us to make that decision, but not jeopardize the trust of our library patrons by surrendering their just wholesale, here, take the records you want. It kind of criminalizes people in a way. So.
Great act of resistance.
Yeah, it's just like we don't have any records to surrender to you.
Is that something people know about?
Yeah.
Patrons know that you do that?
We did let them know. Yeah, we did let them know. This is now almost 25 years ago, this was, the Patriot Act.
Maybe, Barbara, let's turn it over to audience questions at this point.
Can I just? I just want to add one.
It's not on.
That's interesting.
There we go. You know, there are real negative consequences out there. People can lose their jobs. People can be harassed. People can, you know, I just want to share a story, which is, I was a little girl during the McCarthy era, and it's one of my first political memories, actually, was of my parents sitting around the radio. We didn't have a TV, it was a radio, and I could feel their fear. They were not party members, but they certainly knew people who were and whose names were being called. And the lesson I took from that really is my parents reached out to every single one of those people. They provided support for the kids, they provided support for the people, and that's what we have to do. It's why we have to stay strong as a community and help each other and be there for each other, because bad things can really happen, but it's worth it to save what's valuable about this country. So, on that note, we handed out cards. I will come around and collect them, but if there are people who just want to ask a question, I can bring the mic around. And Laura, you want to call on people and I'll be a runner?
1, 2, 3.
Thanks a lot. You know, as a 13-year-old, well, as a 12-year-old, I saw the horrible death house letters, Joyce and Ethel Rosenberg. I grew up in Berkeley, born 1960. So at 13, I was working with Michael and Robbie Muir-Paul to reopen the case, and I saw that they were electrocuted because of Roy Cohn. Then I remember KPFA. I lived downtown on Addison Street. And I remember when Victor Jara was murdered in that stadium by the Chilean junta. And my fear is that everything we throw at them, they don't care. I hear Stephen Miller, he's genocide. I'm so sorry to be upset. I hear it in his voice. I hear the cadence of his speech. And I think back to that military junta. They hate intellectuals, they hate learning, they hate difference. And I am deeply afraid for all of us that this is just the beginning. And I really need your honest answers, if you have them, if you think that it could get that bad.
I do think it can get that bad, which is why we're...
You said it! You said it! Thank you! Thank you!
But I don't think that's a surprise.
Yeah.
We know... I do think it could get that bad, which is why we're here.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we're trying to stop. And that's what we're saying about what we can do, what our collective action is. We should not think, wow, this is a surprise. I think we should not be thinking, well, in 4 years when things are different, because that's not a guarantee, right? I mean, the things that we have had settled expectations about are not settled. So the things that we have had settled expectations about are not settled. Are you hearing me now? So we need to be clear-eyed about the consequence, clear-eyed about the risk, and clear-eyed that if we don't speak, if we are not active, we can guarantee what is coming. So the way that we stand in the way is to stand in the way. And that's not an easy choice, that's not a choice everyone can make, but when we can, we should be making it.
All right.
Did any of the other two want to answer that?
I think Catherine put it very well. Yeah, I think you could get that back. Absolutely, I do. I don't like to think about that, but I watch the way the Trump administration is moving, the way troops are showing up, federal troops, in cities all across the country, and it's hard not to imagine where that's headed.
Dorothy, I have a question for you. In thinking about the right to receive information, I was thinking about archives and the importance of archives, and what a lack. I wonder if you could talk to us about what a lack of funding does to the archives and our ability to seek information that we want. Because as a user of the Oakland Library, of the Oakland History Room, I would watch you provide services to somebody looking for information about their house, or something about the government, or about a building in Oakland, or just like a wide range of people coming in for information to a public library that had archives, and what happens when there's no funding to keep those archives or to provide those archives for people who seek them.
And also just to add to that, Dorothy, that the federal government is actually removing things from the archive.
Sure, they're removing things from the Smithsonian. I mean, I know 2 people here in the Bay Area who donated materials to the African American Smithsonian, and they're already receiving their gifts back from what I call the Black Smithsonian. Yeah, that is happening. There is a real rewrite going on the national, federal level of materials. There is a rewrite in our narrative, our national narrative, and that's part of the erasure that I was trying to, in my very clumsy way, to get to. A lot of what's going on, it's not just the book bans, it's not just the we're not going to buy this, decisions not to buy a particular book or set of books or history. It is, it's part of a kind of a larger erasure, a kind of a rewriting of our national narratives that, and part of that erasure has to do with the availability of materials. You know, we have a Friends of the Oakland History Center now that is very committed, very dedicated to preserving the materials that we have because they're so rare. And as you know, there's only one, for example, Ina Coolbrith journal. And thank God somebody saved it from a fire in the 1906 quake, right? What we need to do, since we're talking about activating ourselves here, thank you guys all for coming out. What we need to do is to discover ways and connect with people who are about saving those things, but also making sure that people understand the importance of our collective histories. You know, that's really what's at stake. There's now, has anybody heard of Prager University?
Yes.
And so now they're putting out this series of cartoon histories about, you know, Frederick Douglass saying, it's okay, you know, it's not so bad being a slave. You know, it's just ridiculous things that are being pushed on the market to say, well, you know, we're trying to make things, you know, the story available, but it's not really the story. It's not the story that we know to be true. And so, as far as funding, we all need to really be committed to making sure those places that we support, and I'm not necessarily talking about Stanford. We know Stanford has money. I'm talking about places like the Oakland Public Library, like smaller collections, there are people in this community, especially in the Bay Area community, that have very important collections that aren't digitized. You know, so you might want to invest in a digitization project or help people with that. You can also become a member of their friends group if they have a friends group, or become a donor to an association that supports their work, supports the subjects that they study or share with the public. Thanks for asking that question.
We have a question from somebody in the audience on a piece of paper. Where is the Edley Center on Law and Democracy located, and what actions?
Louder, a little bit louder.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Where is the Edley Center on Law and Democracy located? It's UC Berkeley, but can you talk about that? What action is your center taking on UC Berkeley's list that was given to the government, and what can we do?
The Edley Center is at the University of California, Berkeley Law School, and so it's a few miles from here. And I'll just say more about the UC Berkeley having given the names, because it's come up. The request for the names came from the office I used to lead, the Office for Civil Rights at the U.S. Department of Education, pursuant to an investigation about whether the university satisfies federal civil rights law when it has notice of discrimination. I made those requests all the time when I led the office. It's totally standard practice. But what's scary now is that we don't have a way to know what happens with that information, and what the Office for Civil Rights will do with those names, and whether they will share them with anyone else, which we would never have done. There's a statutory authority for the office to request information that it needs to be able to fulfill its civil rights enforcement function. So it has the right to ask for it, and it has always been the case that the office can accept anonymized information so that it doesn't have the names. And I did many times, and it's in the manual that is still on the website, that was updated in the Trump administration, that is a permissible way to do it. And you also don't have to even be particularly expert to know that, because the agreement that the federal government secured with Brown University on a related question includes in it, top of page 6, a provision that Brown can provide that information in an anonymized way back to the government. So absolutely the university did not have to give those names. And absolutely it's dangerous to have done so. And it's absolutely good news that it made news, and that there's this outcry, and that there's a pushback on doing it. I will say this. We have news that University of California, Berkeley did it. I am 100% certain that every other University of California system also did it, but we haven't read about it in the news. So that it is a broader issue. So it's good it's in the news, it's bad that it happened. The way to make it not happen going forward is to say to our universities, we expect you to fulfill the law. We expect you to protect us. We expect you to do the things that are responsive to the now and that are not just convenient. So that's how to respond to it.
What's an effective way for us to get that message to the university?
You can write letters. You can to the University of California President's Office is where I would say that, yes, to be clear. But because it's a system-wide issue. But it's also been much in the news that there's negotiations ongoing right now, system-wide with the university, about what they will or will not do with respect to the investigations that the Trump administration has initiated on this topic. If you have views about the wisdom of settling, now is the time to communicate that to the regents, to communicate to the president's office, and to make that known widely. So each of us has a pen. We can write a letter. We can make those views heard. And to the extent that we wonder if it changes activity, it absolutely does. It's why I was talking about, if we're thinking about the ways the winds blows, make sure that the way that we think they should blow are heard, right? That is an important point. Nobody asked me before giving those names over, which I think is unfortunate, given that I was at that office for 8 years and certainly could have answered the question. But, so I couldn't, if I wanted to, speak to what the calculus was within the university. But I do think it's important to be clear, direct, and insistent about taking every measure everywhere to protect as much as we can about our rights, and that it's too dangerous to operate on the speedy, that this is the way we've always done things, this is what we used to be able to expect from a government. Well, they are available online, so I don't have any greater access to the address for the university president than anybody else does, but
Well, then it would help people to want to just sort of do something.
right.
I've got
Yeah.
it. I'll give it to Barbara.
Okay.
Feedback on that, all very well put. One of the challenges that my organization faces, and I think that we're all facing, is which battle do you fight? And I think this exchange here demonstrates that you pick the thing of the panoply of things that is happening in Washington, pick the one that animates you most and go for it, and speak out about that. It's so easy to get distracted, and that's part of the strategy coming out of the White House, is just keep this constant flood. You can't keep up. Pick the thing you want and go for it. So write the letters about the university giving up names. That's terrific. Focus on that and drill in on it.
And just to ask Catherine on the same topic, would it make sense for people to write and say, we want a community meeting on this, or something like that?
I think anything you ask for is worthwhile. I mean, the names have been given, so at this point they are not going to be ungiven. But if we want to make sure it doesn't ever happen again, that we think that there should have been more transparency, that we think this is reprehensible and we're deeply worried about it, this is how I vote. I mean, whatever things you want to ask for. But the problem with this particular thing to be outraged about is that it has happened.
Yeah.
Catherine, am I correct that a lot of people whose names were given don't know that their names were given?
At Berkeley, all 160 people whose names were given do know, because that's what happened. But after the fact, yes, they did. But at the other universities, I think people don't know.
And do they know the allegation?
No. I mean, here's what they don't know. They don't know in what context it was given. To the extent that they have been involved in a university investigation, they know that already, but they may not have been, so, and the surprise of having your name given is in itself upsetting, and then not having any other information leads one to ask lots of questions.
I thought it was all under the guise of what they're calling anti-Semitism. Right.
Correct.
It's not actually anti-Semitism, but I think this whole group of 160 names, I believe, were provided under the guise of
There was a report made to the university that there was an anti-Semitic incident that involved that person, so that person's name was given. But that doesn't mean that the person knows that report happened. Doesn't mean that person knows in what context, how much it was said, what other data was given, when somebody else was interviewed, what did they say about it? They don't have that information.
They can't defend themselves, they can't speak about what.
Right, and I mean, just to name it, they shouldn't have to defend themselves, right? There's a university process that either did or didn't happen that they would need to defend themselves in if the university proceeded down that route. The question that the federal government should be asking is, how does the university respond? And is it consistent with the legal requirements when it has noticed that discrimination may have occurred? Which is not about what happened in a particular case, other than, did the university investigate it? Did the university take appropriate action? Did it follow through with its legal requirements? The frame of, what did Catherine do involved in a particular instance isn't really the question that the federal government ought to be most focused on.
Were the 160 targeted as foreign students? Or
No.
It's a mix.
It's everybody who was reported. So the request from the federal government is give us all of the relevant information so that we can evaluate how you respond, which is an appropriate request. The information will then include anybody about whom any allegation was made and what the university did or didn't do in response.
I asked the question only because there's been such press and focus on trying to get rid of foreign students in particular who are trying to exercise, who are questionable validity according to the administration.
And this is not going to make you feel better, but I'm going to give you more detail about this. The legal question is whether someone was discriminated against based on national origin. The Department of Education Office for Civil Rights does not have jurisdiction over religion. So the way that it gets at the question is, was somebody making stereotyped assumptions about the region of the world somebody comes from, or a country that may be associated with a religion such as Israel? So it is a national origin question, and national origin is the thing that they're asking about. But it may not be whether you're a citizen or not. It may be that you were perceived to be from a particular region of the world, and so that's the question. So it's less comforting, but that's the actual question.
Nothing is particularly comforting these days.
Are there,
I just wanted to flag that the University of California is subject to the California Public Records Act. There might be some information that's obtainable that way about how the university communicated internally about it. They may well have attorney-client privilege arguments, but the institution is subject to the Public Records Act. The federal government is subject to FOIA, but the Trump administration has done a lot to essentially stop responding to requests to FOIA, but Public Records Act still works.
More questions from the audience? Bill Pottinger, and then someone in the back who just raised their hand with the mask. Yeah.
I don't need that, Barbara.
Oh.
Mine is just a more general question. How can we get more young people involved? I mean, there were 3 nice young people here, and I look around at the rest of us, I go to the protest, and I feel discouraged. And even talking to the checker at Trader Joe's or something, you know, did you vote? Or they're not. I've been in classes in College of Marin, and like the people I'm working with, you know, stuff. Are you going to vote? Well, I don't know. How do we get more people involved? I don't know if that's a question you can answer. It's something to talk about.
I think we all have to answer that question, because we all have kids in our lives in some way.
My kids are very involved. and so are their friends. You know, my kids are very involved, and so are their friends. And so, you know, I think it's not a given that on a Thursday night at 7 o'clock, this would be the first priority for your average teenager. And so I am delighted by every one of the people who did come and who are part of this conversation. And I love to be in spaces with people of all ages doing this work. I'm worried too about why we don't have more people of pick your identity characteristic involved in the various issues. And I really hold on to the hope and the gift that is being linked arms with whoever is able to be involved.
Bill, did you
Yes,
have
yeah,
a question?
so I regretted moments into this that I didn't at least contact Berkeley side, for instance, to see if they were interested in being here.
I did.
Yeah, did you?
I did.
Oh, all right, okay, so that stone has been turned over. But in general, my question was whether trying to get support from the press or approach local journalism for additional coverage, extended coverage, more coverage of these issues, specifically free speech issues. And is that a good tool to to use when compared to, say, writing heads of government or even opinion pieces? So can we put journalists to get them to help work this issue as well?
I'd say it's always worth a shot, for sure. If you know people at Berkeley side, or even if you want to drop a line to the editor, they're often usually willing to have that conversation and to hear what it is they're missing in their communities. Good reporters, good editors will hear you out on that. Steering coverage is always a tricky thing because news happens and journalists are famous for doing what they think they should do, not what others tell them they should do. But yeah, absolutely, outreach is a good idea. I think it's critical to support really the survival of local news institutions. We have a relative wealth here, but if you compare what we have here now to what was here 20 years ago, it's sad. There's almost nobody. Now there's a Richmond side, but until that came along, there was nobody covering Richmond, a city of, 120,000? Nobody, except for the Chevron-funded publication. That's shocking to me. nobody's covering a city of 120,000 people. Anyway, my point is support local journalism, get them involved, see if they'll be willing to do it. They're usually willing to talk.
Just to say also, the Daily Californian is who broke this story, so it was super local. and then it got, and they've done very good coverage. They got a screenshot of what actually was sent to people, and their wording is accurate, more accurate than I've seen elsewhere. And then there's a ton of other national and outlets that have picked it up, so it's got quite a few legs. But, you know, to the point about supporting local journalism, this was kids who said this isn't right in our community.
I didn't know the Daily Californian broke that story because it's everywhere. Wow, good for them. See the power of the local press.
I hope I'm not asking a question that's already been answered. I don't hear everything. But would someone explain to me who these people are, the 160 names? I just heard about it on my way over here. Could you give me a summary of is this anti-discrimination? Names that were randomly picked out or names that were given to by the university?
The request from the federal government was for all records related to any notice that the university had received about allegations of anti-Semitic conduct. So the names would be the names of people involved in any allegations that the university received, validated or not, reported by anyone, and then what it is the university did. And I see you shaking your head about that. I want to say that is a totally valid request from the federal government, whose job it is to make sure that universities fulfill their civil rights obligations to every student every day. So the request for information is for the government to be able to find out, were there repeat allegations? Is there a serial offender? Were the allegations all specious? Did they come in because they were organized? Did they come in because this is just what somebody's experience was? Did discrimination occur? Did it not? Did you respond to the totality of the circumstances as a university, as required under law? The federal government can't evaluate that if it doesn't look at the records. And it can't tell if the records are accurate if it can't compare them as against the things that are reported to the federal government. So it's a totally valid request. I used that information all the time for the 8 years that I was in that office in the Obama administration and the Biden administration, and I asked for it also. You don't need to know the actual name. It can be anonymized if the university is timely in what it sends back and not withholding information. I would worry if it was anonymized if I had evidence that a university didn't have accurate records, wasn't giving me all the information that it had received. And then I would come back and say, then I actually need to see what your actual records are. But the issue isn't that the federal government is trying to find out whom at a university to discipline, because that's not their job. It is that the federal government should be, which I'm not saying is what's happening now, but it should be, it's statutorily required to be, asking whether kids' rights are fully protected. And this is the way you do civil rights investigations. Over my dead body, would I ever have given that information to another agency? Over my dead body, would I ever have done anything unrelated to civil rights enforcement with that information? And I understand that people are worried now about what will happen. They can't have the assurance that federal agent actors are fulfilling their legal obligations. And that's why people are worried.
I just want to clarify a little bit more about this, that it's the charge of anti-Semitism, which is always a terrible charge, and real acts of anti-Semitism occur and are terrible, but there's a conflation, we all know this, between anti-Semitism and criticism of Israel and Israeli policy. And I don't know the facts of the case, which of course need to be investigated, but many of these charges are coming from participation in pro-Palestinian demonstrations, and they're really about the criticism of the war in Gaza and Israeli policy in Gaza and in the West Bank. So that's the context in which this is occurring and why one of the reasons it's so dangerous.
Okay, but just to say more about that, because I think context always matters. One, every civil rights issue is a hot issue. Nobody ever wants to be accused of civil rights harm. I mean, full stop. Right. And it's always hotly contested, and you want the federal government actually to ensure that everyone's rights are protected. So someone might have a nefarious reason for making allegations. Someone might be incorrect about whether a violation exists. I want a university who's teaching my kids to be aware every day and conscious about their right to learn safely and freely in school. So I want the university to take it seriously when the allegation comes in and to determine whether action needs to be taken. And if it doesn't, terrific, go on to the next thing. But if it does, help that kid. So, you know, I appreciate and I agree that this is a freighted issue, and nothing that comes to the Office for Civil Rights is not. So, you know, that's the job.
Mary had her hand up.
Surprised about in the last week is that there haven't been any protests on campus about the latest excursion. I don't want to get into Gaza and all that, but I mean, do you think it's because everyone's so terrified now? I mean, there were so many protests before, and now there's nothing.
Okay, well, now here I am with Dirty Laundry, but we had 2 presentations shut down because of protests this week on campus. So, actually, I haven't read about it in the news. But it, you know, it is still a live issue in campuses, and it's still very challenging for campus leadership to help students understand how to dissent. I mean, I have said several times, dissent is all right, dissent is patriotic, we have to be able to express our views, and we have to be able to hear things with which we strongly disagree, and there's a safe and appropriate way to do it.
That kind of like a very abusive workplace where people tattle and spy and rat you out. We're really living in that. So to your point, that you hope we won't be afraid, like this poor reporter who's legitimately afraid, it is very, very hard when you do have a lot of, like the regime, emotionally immature people who need power by like the spies. I'm thinking of the Jewish organization that has spies everywhere that took down all the professors, and the Turkish woman that you spoke of. That's really, really scary. And so to your point again, to see that it happens to one person, and I'm a very vocal person, stand up all the time. I've been fired, I've been ratted, and you think of your own history, it really is kind of frightening that you could be another Miles Taylor, you know? I mean, granted, he wrote to the New York Times, but it's hard to have that courage when you see these people anonymously filming or finding what you write. Even though you were saying we shouldn't be afraid. It is terrifying, I think.
I think it's okay to be scared. So, I mean, you know,
It's an appropriate response to be afraid right now. But it's also an appropriate response to continue to find ways in which you can activate your community and yourselves to fight for our freedom of information, our freedom to read, and all of that. I think everybody is afraid of what's happening right now because it's so counter to what we've been used to. But it's something that this is our new norm, and so we have to rise to the moment in the ways that we can. I've been fearful all year about one thing or another, seeing people disappear. I just found out today that Patrice Cullors' home was invaded by the feds. She's a co-founder of Black Lives Matter, and they just burst into her home to do what? For what? We're still trying to find out. So fear is okay to feel fear. I think it's appropriate right now, and I think that's what they want us to fear, the people who are making these kind of draconian rules. They want us to feel fear, to paralyze us, and that's how authoritarianism works. Make everything afraid, but while you're doing that, reduce the culture, create erasures, create silences in the community. Every authoritarian regime has had a period of silencing, whether suppression of the media, suppression of literature, books. and closing people off from one another, creating suspicion in communities, like Stasi did, you know. I mean, all of these things have happened before in history. And now it's just our turn to figure out how we're going to respond to this moment. Tyranny requires constant effort.
There's been a fair bit of rumbling this last week or so about, from the administration about going after funding and maybe logistical support for protests. I think it's more or less the way they put it. You know, is that just like totally legally speaking a non-starter, or do you think that's a serious thing to be concerned about?
And it's not clear to me yet what mechanisms they're talking about using. It may be that they've said something, but you're talking about J.D. Vance's press conference, and they're going to go after the Open Society Foundation, and they're going to go after the Ford Foundation. One of the things that they mentioned is 501c3 status. So in order to raise money, my organization and thousands of others, you need your 501c3 status, otherwise you can't operate as a nonprofit. And there are rules about when you're a 501c3, you can only do this much lobbying. You can't be directly involved in a political campaign. So will they take that route? I don't know. But the First Amendment generally protects against the government, again, the written law. Whether it'll be when and how and whether it'll be enforced is a separate question, but the written law is the government can't do that based on the viewpoint of the organization. But it's also a truism that when the government, especially the federal government, investigates somebody, it's almost always going to find something if it wants to. So I don't know what they're going to do with respect to that, but I'm not too worried about the Ford Foundation having plenty of resources to combat it. I'm not too worried about the Open Society Institute Foundation, the George Soros thing, having the resources to combat it. I worry a little more about smaller organizations that don't have a way to stand up and fight.
Thank you so much to all three of you and to Lori for hosting. You know, all of your knowledge is so important, so thank you for bringing it. I wanted to ask Dorothy about your remark about tutoring, which is really, I mean, I'm thinking about the granular, ways that we can actually combat ignorance and go about keeping freedom. How would one get involved through libraries with the tutoring opportunities?
Certainly. Most libraries, at Oakland Public Library System, there are application forms on our website to volunteer, and on that application, they have, where would you like to work? Would you like to work with small children? Would you like to tutor? Would you like to work with teens? Would you like to work in, for example, the Oakland History Center or some other area of the library? So on our form in Oakland, we have a variety of things you can do. And also the schools have volunteerism where you can support literacy by being a reading tutor. I know a lot of the elementary schools have those opportunities too, but we'd love it if you could come to the library. This is a great segue. Can I just say some things that I didn't say when I was having my brain freeze? And thanks for enduring that. It was hard for me to endure. I just wanted to mention some organizations. Thanks for this question. The American Library Association, their Office for Intellectual Freedom, has been a lifeline for me in these last few years that I haven't been working in the library, because they keep me abreast of what's going on in libraries outside of our community. And there's a lot going on. We are in a real bubble here as far as the attacks on library. We don't see as much. Of course, we do have, there are national Moms for Liberty, the group, a very well-funded group who are behind a lot of these book challenges in the nation. But I looked on their website and they're not very active here in the Bay Area. But that doesn't mean that we can't offer our support to other people. We've had letter writing campaigns to show our support to librarians in Idaho. And that I got involved in that through Chapter 510, which is a youth writing program in Oakland for kids of color. And we one Saturday just wrote letters of support to the librarians whose libraries were threatened with closure. You know, because sometimes it's not about book banning. Sometimes it's about cuts to the library. Some communities in this country have decided to just get rid of their library system rather than have an LGBT book. Now, that's the most radical thing I've ever heard. It's ridiculous. But it's happening. It's happening. As I said, there are 17 states that have banned over 100 books from the shelves and banning them, and so nobody can read them, so you can't read them, you know. Such a missed opportunity when that happens, right? Because the argument for those Moms for Liberty is, what about my rights as a parent over my, you know, the governance of my child, in other words. But that's a missed opportunity where you're letting bypass you the opportunity to engage that child in this book that you find so much wrong with. Talk to the kid about, well, how did you feel when you read this book? Do you identify with this character? What did you learn about this lifestyle or this culture or this country? You know, it's just such a missed opportunity. So, you know, literacy is really the seed on which this democracy works, right? This is the seed. If we can read, you know, the documents that my colleagues here talked about. We could read the Constitution. We could read what's in the First Amendment. And so it's super, super important that we keep our libraries open and that we keep our schools open and really make sure that they're better. You know, make sure that they are better than they are. Our libraries right now are struggling to stay open and to fight against these kinds of charges. But also, there seems to be, and this is what I write about in my next book that will come out next year, I guess I should tell you since I got this captive audience. I've written a book, it's tentatively titled Behind the Desk at Oakland, Maine. And it's coming out next summer, published by Heyday Press here over in Berkeley. And in it I talk about all of these various challenges, you know, the socioeconomic challenges that are facing libraries, because as many of you may know, you know, those issues certainly come into the library, you know, the homeless, the poor, and all that. But it's really essential that we really talk about how we can support those institutions, that social infrastructure that I talked about, and find a way to keep it as robust as we remember it being. I mean, I remember the library, show of hands, how do you remember your library? I remember it being a robust institution where I could wander and roam and pick any book off the shelves, and books I knew I couldn't understand, but it was like it was here and I could touch it and I could leaf through it and pick out some words and pick out some names. I don't want to deprive, I don't want to see any future generations deprived of that. I know everybody's scrolling now, the internet, and you know, but it's still our most democratic institution that we have. And one of the things that's happening that really is heartbreaking to me is that with more outside pressures, more public libraries are falling under the sway of very conservative groups, but also financial constraints where they have a centralized ordering system where, you just push this button and these are the 12 pre-selected books that you're going to get this month, or the 40 pre-selected books you're going to get this month. And it loses that specificity, that an individual librarian might pick out for that particular community. So I wanted to tell you about the American Library Association Office for Intellectual Freedom. They're at ala.org. Another organization I think you should know about if you want to really support libraries and find out what's going on here and in other places is everylibrary.org. They are really keeping up with the legislation regarding libraries and impacting libraries. Everylibrary.org. So I wanted to just share that with you. And then locally, just a film, Free for All, which was, I don't know how many, has anybody seen Free for All, the documentary about the public libraries? It was broadcast on PBS a few months ago. And then there's one coming out this year, The Librarians, about all the legal battles that librarians are facing. That's a documentary that's coming out this year. And the clip of it is on YouTube that you can view.
And just to say, we're hoping to get a showing of The Librarians somewhere.
Oh, that's good. Invite me, please.
Yes.
Yeah, this was part of, we had this great idea of a sequel to this event, of a showing of The Librarians. We planned, I tried to contact them months ago. Just last week I heard back from them, so we'll see. But yes, I think it's it will be showing around anyway, and we will try to actually bring it to the community, let you know. I also want to say, if there's anything that you folks have, organizations or information or referrals of things, send it to Lori and me, and we'll get it out to everybody. So, like all these organizations you're talking about and stuff. So, one more question?
Do we have any more questions? We can have one more question. If there's not, I'm going to ask my question. Okay. It's kind of a tough one, though. There was a headline that Barbara and I saw in some small online publication. Republicans celebrate Kirk as free speech champion, demand critics to be fired. Nothing quite says where we're at as this headline. It's not an Onion headline, should be. So I'm just wondering how you see us trying to heal this divide between what red versus blue sees as freedom of speech. It's a tough thing to defend sometimes, but there seems to be such a big divide coming up that somehow strikes me as very difficult. If you've got any last thoughts on how we might fill that divide.
In some ways, that's an age-old thing. Free speech for me, but not for thee. And it depends. I get questions about, so can't the university keep, what's Charlie Kirk's organization, Turning Point America? Can't they keep them from coming on campus to speak because it's just going to cause problems? And I'd say, no, they can't. If it's a state university, and in California, even if it's a private university, they can't. And so this is an age-old thing. Like, people don't want to hear the words or the ideas that they disagree with, and the political majority will always try to suppress the political minority. That's the whole, the foundation of the First Amendment is that assumption. But it's a lot worse now. I mean, the rank, just the hypocrisy of people in this current administration, where there's a good piece, I think it's in the New York Times today, that says, here's what they said 3 years ago, here's what they say now. We want, like, the free speech executive order in Trump's mind, that's free speech. Free speech means things he agrees with get promoted, things he disagrees with get thrown in jail. That, in a way, that's not unusual for a politician to behave that way, and that's why the First Amendment's there. Until recently, I think we had a lot more common ground than we do now on the idea that I disagree with what you say, but I would defend with my life your right to say it. I don't think there's a lot of people that think that anymore. And I don't know what you do about that, but you just keep hammering away at it and believing it and asserting it, and things will come around, I hope, if we keep our vigilance and keep ourselves active.
I think that's right. I mean, there are waves in our country of repression of speech and also of this kind of conflict, and like there are waves about book bans. You know, we are a few decades away from the last time we had a wave of book bans of this type. And so, you know, the way to combat it is to remind people that everybody has a right to say the things that they think. We have a right to choose whether we listen or we don't. Right? You don't have to go to a presenter on a campus who's coming to say things that you find reprehensible. And also to teach in school, to teach our communities how to debate, and to teach communities how to engage with ideas. And so you know, we are all more equipped. And I'll just say, you've heard from me a lot. I have a lot of optimism about what we can do, and I really encourage us to do those things. This is a deeply dangerous time for doing it. And just yesterday, the Department of Education, Federal Department of Education, issued a press release saying that the country's 250th anniversary is coming, so they're going to have a new civility initiative, and it's going to encourage patriotic understanding of our American history. And it's going to be headed not at the Department of Education, but by the America First Institute. Do with that what you will, right? But so you know, so I think that it's important that we hold on to. We know what our rights are. We know what is available for us for debate and expression of ideas, and we actually find many ways right now to encourage knowledge about our history and acting in ways that are not ahistorical.
I think moving forward, we all have to make a commitment to be teachers and students, you know, and accept the fact that we have the ability to do hard things, because this will be hard, kind of turning the tide, because as you said, there's just this tsunami of information and questionable and bad and hypocritical laws and declarations coming at us, and that was part of the strategy. You know, Bannon said, let's flood the ground. And that's what it feels like. You feel like you're being fire hosed with one bad news story after another. I see people shaking their heads. But we definitely have to kind of work together, have more programs like this, educate young people about civics. Remember that in school, civics. We do not rank very highly as a country in our understanding of how our country works or how it's supposed to work. And it can be very discouraging to young people. It's discouraging to me. I'm not young. I jumped into a new actuarial table recently. And so it's really important for us to really, instead of kind of, and then I know the impulse is there because I submit to it sometimes, is to go into our hidey holes and not say anything and not talk about it and do a news blackout and so forth. But I don't think we can afford to do that this time. There have been other opportunities where, you know, other times that we've done that, but I think we really need to really turn into our own version of an activist, you know, and I'm going to commit myself to being an activist in the way that I know how to help people and educate people and tell them, you know, the truth about as I see it. But also be able to engage people who may not agree with me, who may not see things, who may see the library as a demon cult or something, I don't know. But be able to hear what they have to say, but tell them what I have to say. And I think we've lost that capacity, and we can get it back because it's ours, and then let's not forget that. This country is ours. There are more of us than there are in the federal government. So good luck.
Well, thank you all so much, and thank you all so much for coming, for your questions, for your interest. We got a long struggle ahead of us, a hard struggle, but you keep on trucking along, and we do what I love what Dorothy said about we're all activists in the way we can be activists, and that's an important message. So thank you all, really appreciate it.